Good afternoon. Welcome to this Bible study published by the Judson Road Church of Christ in Longview, Texas. My name is Tyler Sams, and I'll be directing our minds in this study this afternoon. If you've got your New Testaments with you, I invite you to open up to Mark chapter 8. Mark chapter 8, that is where we're going to continue this series of studies out of Mark's Gospel account. So be opening up your Bibles, if you would, there to Mark chapter 8. And let's get started. We're not going to cover absolutely everything here in Mark chapter 8. Some of this has already been covered in one of our other YouTube series entitled Who is Jesus? The first part of Mark chapter 8 is covered there in detail, and so you can go check that out yourself. But we will set a little bit of context here. Jesus feeds the 4,000 here in Mark chapter 8. And after the feeding of the 5,000, which is recorded in both Mark 6 and John 6, you'll remember that people were asking for Jesus to do more signs, especially in John chapter 6. They want to see more. They want Jesus to do more things for them. They're ready to take Jesus and make him their king until in John chapter 6 he makes some comments that really challenge some of them and turn their hearts away from him. After the feeding of the 4,000 here in Mark chapter 8, we have the same exact thing happen. In Mark chapter 8 and verse 11, the Pharisees came out and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. They wanted to see something else. Apparently, the feeding of the 5,000 and then the feeding of the 4,000, along with all of the various other miracles Jesus had done, was not enough for them. They wanted more. And so Jesus tells them he's not going to do something else. In Mark chapter 8 and in verse 12, sighing deeply in his spirit, he said, "Why does this generation seek for a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign shall be given to this generation." Of course, when we pull in other gospel accounts, we find out there's a little bit more here. No sign would be given to this generation except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the whale, so the Son of Man would be 3 nights in the heart of the earth. It was an argument about his resurrection. That would be a sign that the Pharisees and others would be given. But Jesus was not going to be in the business of working miracles on demand solely to placate the Pharisees. And so after this episode ends, in verse 13 it says, "Leaving them, he embarked and went away to the other side. And they," that seems to be the apostles, "had forgotten to take bread, and did not have more than one loaf in the boat with them. And he was giving orders to them, saying, Watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the leaven of Herod." And so Jesus begins to warn his apostles here about the Pharisees, but the apostles just seem to completely miss what Jesus is saying. In verse 16, they begin to discuss one another the fact that they had no bread. Jesus isn't talking about literal bread, but the disciples just seem to absolutely miss what Jesus is trying to convey. And what that does is actually set the stage for what's going to happen next in Mark's gospel account. Jesus, aware of what they were talking about, said to them in verse 17, "Why do you discuss the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet see or understand? Do you have a hardened heart? Having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many large baskets full of broken pieces did you pick up?" And they said to him, 12. "And when I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you pick up?" And they said to him, 7. And he was saying to them, "Do you not yet understand?" They didn't understand, but they needed to. And so in verse 22, they came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to him and entreated him to touch him. So here we are coming into the city of Bethsaida, and Jesus is approached by a blind man. And what's interesting here is this is going to be the first and only time that Jesus heals someone in what we might call a bit-by-bit fashion. And so the question that some have posed, and a question that might come to our minds as well, is why is this different? Is Jesus somehow weakened here? Is he facing a challenge that's too difficult for him? Is healing this blind man just too much for him at this moment? But we need to consider everything that is going on around this in order to find an answer to our question. Moving from no sight to sight is a miracle in and of itself. Read the story with me here. In verse 23, taking the blind man by the hand, Jesus brought him out of the village. And after spitting on his eyes and laying his hands on him, he said to him, "Do you see anything?" And he looked up and said, "I see men. I am seeing men walking about like trees." Then again Jesus laid his hands upon the man's eyes, and he looked intently and was restored and began to see everything clearly. And Jesus sent him to his house, saying, "Do not even enter the village." So Jesus heals this man initially of his blindness, but he still has some vision trouble, right? He sees men, but they're walking about like trees. I kind of get the sense there. If you've ever woken up in the morning and your eyes are kind of glazed over and everything is kind of fuzzy and you have to blink a few times and maybe rub your eyes so that then everything comes into focus, I kind of get the feeling that's what this man was experiencing, that his eyes, to some degree, are kind of glazed over and everything is fuzzy, and so people look kind of like a tree would look. But that in and of itself is a miracle, isn't it? I see men walking about like trees. This man has moved from no sight to sight. That's a miracle. And so what Jesus has done at the first here is a miracle. Even if he did nothing else, he's given sight to somebody who previously had no sight. And somebody might quibble and say, well, how did the blind man know what a tree looked like? Well, I think that's kind of almost an unkind and rude thought towards people who deal with vision impairment. We can perceive different objects not only by our eyes, but also by tactile sensation. We can touch and get an idea for what things are like, what things look like, what their shape is, by feeling them. No doubt this guy had been around trees before and had felt trees, encountered trees, and so he would be well equipped to describe what he was now seeing for the first time. I see people, but they have kind of the shape of trees moving about. Now, back to our point at hand, Jesus has done a miracle here, and so whatever conclusion we come to, we need to understand that. But I want you to look down at chapter 8 and verse 23. Taking the blind man by the hand, he brought him out of the village, and after spitting on his eyes and laying his hands on him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" Well, Jesus had healed this man. Of course he's going to see something. Why then ask the question? You ask the question if you want a specific response. And the specific response was, "I see men walking about," verse 24, "like trees." Jesus isn't facing a challenge that's too difficult for him. Going back to Matthew chapter 9, Matthew chapter 11, and Matthew chapter 12, Jesus has repeatedly healed blind people. So coming across a blind person and going to heal him would not be something that was out of the question or beyond Jesus' ability. So something more is going on. But what is it? Well, look there at verse 17. Remember what Jesus had said to his disciples? "Why do you discuss the fact that you have no bread?" They were worried about the fact that they didn't have bread to eat. But what had happened just earlier? Jesus had fed 4,000 people miraculously. What had happened even before that? Jesus had fed over 5,000 people miraculously. The disciples are worried about things they didn't need to be worried about. Jesus was going to take care of them. And that's what they needed to see. They needed to get a fuller and clearer picture of Jesus. They were seeing, but they weren't perceiving. Keep reading with me in verse 17. "Why do you discuss the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet see or understand? Do you have a hardened heart? Having eyes do you not see, and having ears do you not hear, and do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many large baskets full of broken pieces did you pick up? They said 12. When I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you pick up? They said 7. And he was saying to them, do you not yet understand? And then we immediately transition into the story of this blind man who is healed. That's the point here. This is an object lesson. The healing of this man, Jesus uses it as an object lesson. The disciples were seeing, but they weren't seeing clearly. But they needed to. They needed to understand. They needed to perceive. They needed this insight. They needed to more fully trust Jesus, but how was that going to come about? By listening to Jesus. By truly seeing Jesus. By opening their hearts to him. Verse 25, Jesus laid his hands on the man's eyes. He looked intently and was restored and began to see everything clearly. Here's what Jesus is able to do. He's able to take those who don't see and give them sight. He's able to take those who don't see clearly and give them perfect sight. That was the lesson the apostles needed. That's why Jesus heals in this manner at this time. This is the only miracle of Jesus that plays out in this way, bit by bit, where Jesus is going to miraculously heal twice, once to bring about sight and once to bring about perfect sight. It's a lesson for us about what Jesus can give, about the importance of looking to Jesus and properly perceiving Jesus. But it was especially a message to his disciples. They were seeing, but they needed to see more clearly. And the way that they would see more clearly was by looking to Jesus. Thanks for joining me in this study of Mark chapter 8 today. I hope you have a great start to your week. I look forward to being back with you on Wednesday evening. Take care.